In the Islamic tradition, and I was going to bring this about the book that you wrote, Conscience and Its Enemies. In that first chapter, you talked about those necessary conditions. And you mentioned, for instance, just human dignity, the idea of human dignity, preservation of family, the protection of family, and then law, that you needed to have a government to protect life and property. And I told you this before, I wanted to write an article called when Robert George meets Fakhruddin al-Razi, or Imam al-Juwayni. Because Imam al-Juwayni, who was the teacher of al-Ghazali, and if al-Ghazali is to Islam what Aquinas is to Christianity.
I think we have a window for him, do we not?
This is al-Razi is here. Yeah. But al-Ghazali was a student of Imam al-Juwayni. Imam al-Juwayni said that there are 6 things that religion came to preserve, and you identified most of them in that article. He said the first one was life itself, the preservation of life, because we cannot know that life is sanctified except through a supernatural means to do that.
Sanctification, yeah.
Sanctification, yeah, that it's sanctified. We can obviously, through reason, we can make arguments that thou shalt not, murder, unjustified killing. But the argument that the soul is sanctified is something that comes from a supernatural source. And so he argues that preservation of life, preservation of property is another one. The idea that human beings, they need a certain modicum of goods to live, and those goods that are in their possession should be protected from other people aggressing on them. And preservation of religion itself, which you missed, the preservation of religion. And then preservation of intellect. So, for instance...
that was my number 4.
Right, exactly, number 4. You got 5 out of... Yeah,
it's not bad, right?
I was definitely impressed.
Think of a baseball player.
Right. So, and then he said preservation of family. And the last one, the 6th one, was preservation of human dignity.
I got that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so those 6 things, according to Islamic law, all of the laws in Islam go back to preserving one of those 6 things. So the prohibition of alcohol is to preserve the intellect, the prohibition of murder to preserve life, the prohibition of theft to preserve property, the prohibition of fornication and adultery to preserve family, and the prohibition of torture is to preserve human dignity. There's no law in Islam that you cannot take back.
And would religion be blasphemy?
Blasphemy. The blasphemy law is preservation of religion. And so what's fascinating to me is that Fakhruddin al-Razi, who comes after, says we can reduce all of these to 2 principles. That religion is here to accrue benefits for human beings and to ward off harm. And this, as you well know, was the fundamental reason why within ourselves are these 2 forces, the concupiscent or the desirous force, the appetitive soul, and the irascible soul, this soul that gets angry, real indignation. So the appetitive soul, the appetites that we have are to benefit our bodies. And the irascible is to ward off harm. But when these 2 override the regulator of those 2,
rationality,
which is reason, right? When Imam al-Ghazali talks about the pig soul, the dog soul, and the sage soul, and so the pig soul needs to have the shepherd, right? Making sure that it doesn't overeat itself or eat its own young, because pigs will eat their own young if they're hungry enough. And then the dog soul ends up can attack like this poor woman who lost her face. She recently died. She had tried to commit suicide, and the dog was trying to wake her up and bit off her face, trying to wake her up, but it was her own dog. So it wasn't trying to harm her, but in the end it did harm her, trying to save her. So the dog soul, when it takes over, will end up harming, even though it's there to benefit. Yeah. And so al-Ghazali adds a 4th component, which Aristotle didn't see, and I think it's very interesting, and I've thought a lot about this, and he might be wrong, but Aristotle thought that if these three were in balance, which are the three virtues, right? Because the virtue of the sage, the virtue of reason was wisdom or prudence. The virtue of the irascible soul was courage. And the virtue of the appetitive soul was temperance. He said if these three were functioning in accordance to right desire and working, then it resulted in the fourth cardinal virtue, which was justice. Ghazali argued actually that justice was the faculty of balance. And one of the interesting things, you use the word deliberation, that we deliberate, which is from delibere, which is out of balance. Like we weigh things. This is what the reasonable human being will do when they're confronted with problems, is to weigh things and to deliberate. And in many ways, we're living in a world where we have lost balance. We're profoundly out of balance. We're out of balance. And I mean, one of the things, this is a great example of complete insanity. You know, the plastic bottle. And I will give you an example. I brought a Bedouin here from West Africa. He's a brilliant man, really well versed in a lot of sciences. And we were in Arizona, in New Mexico, and I was teaching a course there, and he was with me. And this person took one of these cups and drank some and threw it in the garbage can. And he asked me, "What is that?" And I said, "What, the garbage can?" He said, "Why did he throw that cup in there?" And I said, "Well, those cups are made for one-time use." And he said, "That is a very bad sign when a civilization reaches that level of extravagance." Like he was horrified by that because the old
sin of luxury.
Luxuria. He grew up in a place where everything is recycled because desert people live with very limited resources. And so the idea of creating a bottle to be used once and thrown out is complete insanity. And this is not sustainable. Nobody can argue for the sustainability of a lifestyle of going to Starbucks every day and getting that cup and just throwing it into the garbage can, and recycling is a total lie. I mean, so these are real problems of balance.
It's hard